Hey, it's Kurt, and you're listening to F Your Opinion. This is a podcast where I chat with some of my Formula One buddies. Today, I have Ian, who, with his friend Dave, hosts a car culture podcast called Team ClearCoat. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and all the usual places. But today, Ian and I are talking Formula One. We spoke the Wednesday before the Chinese Grand Prix. Enjoy, and F Your Opinion. I'm with Ian. Ian is yet another person I've met, befriended via karting or some form of motorsport. Ian and his buddy Dave put on another automotive-themed podcast called Team ClearCoat. By all means, check it out. It's kind of a cool format. It's two guys just chatting about their take on cars and putting their spin on it. Ian, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and what kind of Formula One fan are you, and how long have you been following the sport and all that?
Yeah, like I said, I have a car podcast called Team ClearCoat, and I do some karting, which is how I met you, and I do some racing in Chump Car. I've done a Lemons race, so I just try to get seat time and whatever's cheap, basically, and then adventures in making my own car worse. As far as what kind of racing fan I am, I'm kind of a bad racing fan. I watched Formula One when I was a kid, when it would be like on ABC and stuff like that. And then, most of my life I've been a very event motorsport fan. Like I'll watch the Indy 500 every year.
Sure.
I'll watch whatever coverage of Le Mans is available. But as long as I could, for probably the last 10-ish years, I've stayed pretty up on Formula One, and the last, I would say, 6 or 7, I've been able to watch pretty much every race.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my history with that.
Cool. Are you a team guy or a driver guy?
I'm a driver guy, but I have very easily influenced loyalties. I am a big fan of Hamilton. I like whoever's driving is kind of exciting to watch. I try not to let the off-track nonsense bug me, which is probably why I'm still a Hamilton fan. I like anyone who's an exciting driver. So I'm a big fan of Daniel Ricciardo and his late braking nonsense, and Hamilton, who can just the number of perfect laps that guy has in him is just absurd.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
What do you think of Verstappen?
I mean, he's exciting to watch, and I like him. I like him in a lot of the same way I really liked Kobayashi. Because you never know. It's like if you brought a bird inside someplace, you don't know what's going to happen, but it's probably going to be something you haven't seen.
Yeah.
So, I like the agent of chaos element that Verstappen brings to it. But the win or crash dichotomy is an interesting
Podium
one
or DNF
for a race car driver.
Yeah, is one of the two.
Right. It's no in between.
I always defined Kobayashi's driving style as daring. There was it his first race? I'm trying to remember. It was one of his early races. I want to say it was in Japan or something, where he was attacking Jenson Button, and he was pulling some moves on Button that nobody really expected out of him. But yeah, I miss Kobayashi, and I miss. That's a good comparison, because I feel like they have the same kind of daring. I think Verstappen's skill backs it up a little more, where he's maybe had a bit of beginner's luck, or, right place, right time. But, the results have generally been better for Verstappen than they ever were for Kobayashi. But, that's a whole other conversation.
Well, and I think Verstappen's also probably in a better car than he ever was.
Oh, yeah, most definitely, yeah.
and he's just maybe 10% more consistent than Kobayashi was.
Yeah.
Which helps. But the Kobayashi moment that I always think about is the one where he was in Brazil in the wet. I think it was one of the last. It might have been his last race or his last season or something like that, or second to last season. And he was just like driving around people like he was on a mission. It was awesome.
Yeah, I miss him. Moving on, so we're a couple days after the Bahrain GP, which was, I think, by pretty much everyone's measure, was a pretty great race. It was interesting qualifying, kind of the whole situation with Verstappen and Hamilton with the grid penalty, so we got a kind of mixed up grid. Interesting result with kind of coming down there, the tire strategy with Vettel. But what I really want to talk about with this race is it kind of opened up that almost like inherent rivalry between McLaren and Toro Rosso. And it's, Gasly finished fourth. Great result for him in the Toro Rosso. Hartley was way back in 13th or something. I don't think he was in the points. But, Gasly qualified ahead of both the McLarens and finished ahead of both the McLarens on legit pace. And so, I guess the question is, it's always going to be this question of, did McLaren make a mistake switching from the Honda? And we all know, I think anyone would agree, that a Toro Rosso chassis could never hold a candle to a McLaren chassis, drivetrain included. So what does that say in terms of this, again, of this secret rivalry? It's almost the elephant in the Formula One room that, every time Toro Rosso is ahead of McLaren, it's kind of, it looks really bad for McLaren, I guess.
I just wonder, has anyone memed a photo of Ron Dennis standing outside Honda's headquarters in the rain with a boombox over his head? Trying to get them back. I just like the idea that the people at McLaren are FOMOing about Honda. It's so funny and childish. And I was thinking about this. I think maybe we're in a moment where these last few seasons where the rate of change in these engines is just so rapid that that any of these teams that aren't a works team just are never going to be able to get that right combination at the right time. It's like lightning in a bottle right now,
Right.
And remember last year, part of the problem, or was it the year before? It was 2016. Part of the problem with McLaren was their bodywork was not allowing for cooling. So there's really no guarantee that engine would still work in the McLaren with that design. Maybe their chassis would be worse with that engine. We don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. The compatibility between the chassis and the drivetrain. That's something that, there's definitely a variable there. And I mean, to play off your Say Anything reference, I mean, I think we're in for this emotional roller coaster as the season unfolds, right? I mean, as, McLaren develops the car and they get, they're bringing updates, how much is Toro Rosso going to be bringing the car? So it is kind of this back and forth of, I feel like McLaren is much more in a race against Toro Rosso than they are against Red Bull or Renault, because there's just that much more to prove there. And if you even look at in the bigger picture, if Honda is delivering these results for Toro Rosso, it does open the door for Red Bull to move right into that, opportunity as well. I think the subtext is Toro Rosso is basically the proving ground for the 2019 or 2020 Red Bull, whoever Red Bull's engine supplier is going to be. So, yeah, this season bearing out, I think, we're in for a ride in terms of these results.
Yeah, I think the Red Bull thing is the key to all this, right? Because then if that's going to decide, that's a lot of money moving, either staying with Renault or even pushing Honda's engine development further along. So that's going to be something to watch. And I think they're saying it's going to be soon that they're going to make a decision, right? Because their contract with Renault is up at the end of the year, so they've got to sign something soon.
So yeah, there is a bit of bad blood between Red Bull and Renault, and I even want to say I thought I read something that said Renault is giving Red Bull a very short leash this year, where they need to declare, are they re-upping their contract for next year by like Monaco. They need to decide well before the halfway point of the season whether they're going to continue, because I think that's, again, Renault doesn't need all this bad publicity from Red Bull, very publicly, slagging them off, in the press or publicly just disparaging them. So, yeah, we'll see. I mean, it is going to be interesting to see how it pans out with Honda, and then the implications of that with Red Bull. And kind of in the same vein, I wanted to bring up also, we had a double DNF from Red Bull in Bahrain. From what I can tell, it looks like both cars just shut off. There was definitely some Red Bull reliability issues at the end of last year, or generally with, again, I think Verstappen had probably 3 or 4 just mechanical DNFs where the car just died on him. What does that say about Red Bull's, I don't know, quote unquote custom engine? Because no other Renault runner is having this reliability problems. What does that say about, Red Bull trying to customize or, package that engine in their car?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to be related to the battery pack, right? That's been the line from everyone, that it's related to the electrical components. So who knows? It could be a chassis powertrain compatibility issue, like we were talking about before, or it could just be. I had read one place that basically Red Bull was using the same energy recovery system as they had from 2016. So It's been the same for essentially 3 seasons now.
Right, I've heard that as well.
So that's probably a big part of it, right? They haven't had any upgrades to that in 3 years. And these engines are making obviously a lot more power than they were 3 years ago.
Right, and I think it's almost, kind of almost like I was saying, where Red Bull was enjoying almost a constructor status or an engine builder status with their relationship with Renault after Renault backed out of their factory program, I don't know how many years ago, 6-7 years ago, when there was no factory Renault team. I think Red Bull had kind of free range to build and package or probably demand certain things out of Renault in terms of what the engine needed to be and how it needed to fit that they probably can't do now. And I wonder if Red Bull, again, back to the whole Toro Rosso thing, if their goal is to be as much of a factory team as you can be, because, I mean, to Ron Dennis's point and the point you made, being a customer team is not really the way to win championships. So,
right.
From Red Bull's perspective, it seems like they want to kind of do things their way in order to win these championships. But, short of buying Cosworth or something, I don't know if it's going to happen.
Yeah. So this is going back a little bit further than my off-track F1 news memory extends. But isn't it true that Renault's participation in F1 is basically like conditional, right? That because of the circumstances surrounding how they left in the first place, because of all the Flavio Viatori, their old team boss, being shady, and all of that. And then now they're they have a unique relationship with Red Bull, partly because of all that, right? Because they were trying to get back into F1. And F1 was like, well, we got this other team now. You have to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I do wonder if there is some bigger politics at play. Because
I mean, it's Formula One, so
yeah,
yes.
There is. Yeah, that's true. I answered my own question, but yeah, it does beg the question of, how does this is a weird arrangement of Renault being a factory team, then leaving, then coming back, really not that long after they left. It wasn't a very long hiatus there. So yeah, it is kind of an interesting thing, that relationship and how it's been set up. So yeah, I guess time will tell. And I always kind of question Renault's involvement because they're a automobile manufacturer. I feel like those entities are the most fickle in Formula One. I mean, consider Toyota, consider Honda when they were a proper team. They came and went pretty quickly. So yeah, I almost kind of wonder the same thing about Renault, where it's just like, look, this is our goal. If we don't make it this year, then we're just done here. We're not, there's no, fighting to hang in for another season. The board has decided the Formula One program has been shelved and we're doing something else. So I do wonder how far away the Renault works team is from just getting the axe in a boardroom decision, and then how does that also impact some of these other teams, big picture. But
well, and I think that's part of the point of the push to keep the hybrid powertrains, right? Because that's the only way you can make it relevant to road car manufacturers anymore.
Right.
Because the future of road cars is not V10s, normally aspirated V10, as we can tell.
Yeah.
So if you want that money, and it's always a search for money, that's the motorsports is less about going fast and more about finding money.
Right.
So it's going to continue like this to try to chase those road car manufacturers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough row to hoe. Because it is being relevant is key. And I mean, I think big picture, I think all cars going 100% electric, whether we like that as car fans or not, is kind of seems inevitable almost at some point. So yeah, in terms of attracting, a Volkswagen or a Audi or Porsche or, Honda or Toyota as works teams again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems like a tough sell. So
yeah, absolutely. And then that move also hurts the just 100% racing teams, right? Because they don't have the resources to develop that technology. So it's kind of like this inevitable spiral that we're in.
Yeah, and at the same time, you have when Toyota was in, 10 years ago or so, my understanding is they had the biggest budget out of all the teams. And they maybe had a few podiums, but they definitely never had wins. Maybe they would steal a podium here or there somewhere, but, even with those resources, something was still missing. And, they weren't making it easy on any of the other teams because there's still a competitor, in there, there's another team to be beat. But yeah, even with the full backing of a car manufacturer doesn't always guarantee success. And I think that's the frustration, right? Is if you're Toyota and you're like, hey, what are we spending all this money for? Why are we humiliating ourselves in this racing series? Let's just get out of here and let's go humiliate ourselves in Le Mans.
Right.
Basically is what happened with Toyota. So, I mean, it's even with all the resources and an unlimited budget and all the engineering prowess in the world, it still doesn't guarantee you that result. But you can sure make life miserable for the smaller teams, as the 800-pound, $800 million gorilla in Formula One.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this week, Chinese Grand Prix. I always love a back-to-back racing weekend. Do you think Ferrari can make it 3 in a row? Do you think Mercedes is going to get their act together and finally put their usual string of 1-2 finishes together? What's your take on China?
Well, I'd be surprised if they got a 1-2 Mercedes, because Bottas just seems like nowhere right now.
Yeah.
And even with like the best case scenario at the end of last weekend, he wasn't able to pass Vettel, which I know Vettel was no slouch, but he should have been able to do that. I don't know. It's a tough one, because I feel like if Red Bull can keep their car, it's a good track for them, right? Because there's a lot of high speed corners. It's a track that rewards chassis, and the best passing opportunity is like braking is a really fast braking zone, which is like what Ricciardo does. So their car together, I think Ricciardo will be on the podium. But I think my prediction would be Hamilton 1, Vettel 2, Ricciardo 3.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I agree that Bottas really didn't do himself any favors at the end of at the end of the race in Bahrain, where it seemed like didn't seem like he was really putting a lot of pressure on Vettel. I mean, Vettel was on old tires. I get that the Ferrari's got very good pace. But I was expecting a little more out of Bottas to close and put pressure on Vettel in those last few laps, and that didn't really happen. So
yeah, he gave himself one chance.
Yeah, and I feel like the last 10 laps there, he should have really been on top of Vettel to just force him to make an error, force those tires to just run right out of rubber, or something. Right. But it just didn't happen. So yeah, he is underperforming. I think seeing Hamilton, Vettel, Ricciardo on the podium, that's an interesting take. I do think Red Bull is lurking right in there, and if they can put together a solid race, I think you can consistently see them on the podium, whether it's reliability or luck or Verstappen overdriving the car or any number of other factors. Yeah, it hasn't fallen into Red Bull, but I think they're stronger than the leaderboard illustrates currently, especially with the double DNF last weekend. So yeah, I'd like to see something out of Red Bull, be serious contenders, and at least it gives the indication that Renault engine is competitive. If they can be up there on the podium, I think it's a good setup for the rest of the field. It almost encourages a lot of those other teams to be like, okay, we can challenge, we can be competitive too. So yeah, I'd like to see Ricciardo or Verstappen on the podium. I am curious to see, because I feel like Hamilton's got to be frustrated with penalties and mistakes and screw ups costing him probably what he felt like would have been 2 races that he could have run away with and easily won. So it'll be interesting to see. He's usually pretty strong in China. So I'm curious to see how it unfolds. I expect a pretty good result out of them as well, and I think it's just a question of luck. Luck has played a big factor in this season already, just in the first 2 races. So be curious to see how that carries on.
Yeah. I always feel like whenever Hamilton is forced to manage, like he has been these last 2 races, he just doesn't. There's like no life to it. Like he just doesn't do well. Yeah. But when he's just allowed to push, he'll put out a perfect lap, and he wins races doing that.
Yeah.
So if they just kind of like let him off the leash, maybe I think that's probably the best thing.
Yeah, I think so too. And then that brings around the question of, well, there's only 3 engines per season. So do you let him off the leash now and, potentially take a penalty in Mexico or something when you're over your engine quota. It's a long season, and I think that's
right.
why, I think a younger Lewis Hamilton would have been very frustrated and emotional after the last two races, but I think he realizes, it's a long season, and getting a couple wins taken away from you or kind of snatched kind of at the last minute or for something that wasn't your fault is disappointing, but he's still collecting points, and I think he's still in it for the long haul. So I think he's going to turn it around this race. I think he's definitely my favorite to win. I think he would have probably won. I think he probably would have taken Bahrain if he was on the front row with Vettel, but who knows? But I'm excited for this race.
Yeah,
China's a good track. I'm looking forward to it, and it should be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, man. Well, I think we'll call it there for the week. I'll be in touch. But thanks for coming on the show.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good talking to you.
All right, you too. Bye.
Catch you later. Bye.